Daniel Rivers seemed to have it all: a thriving career, a loving wife, Angela, and 2 wonderful kids. But his world shattered when Angela's betrayal uncovered cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. As they struggled to repair the damage, life threw them another devastating blow: Angela's battle with a relentless illness. Amid heartbreak, forgiveness, and the weight of uncertainty, Daniel and Angela faced challenges that tested their love, resilience, and their family's strength. With emotions running high and the stakes even higher, will their bond survive the ultimate test? Join us for this gripping story of love, loss, and redemption. I'm Daniel Rivers, 42, a successful software architect and a self-proclaimed bookworm. I've always thought of myself as a simple man, dedicated to my work, my family, and occasionally geeking out over the latest sci-fi series. But 3 years ago, my life took a turn I never expected. It was the kind of plot twist you'd find in one of those cheesy soap operas my wife, Angela, loved to watch. Except, in this story, I wasn't just a viewer, I was the lead character. Let me take you back to where it all began. It's 2019, and I'm living in Seattle, Washington, with my wife, Angela Rivers, 38, and our 2 kids. Emily and Jacob. Angela and I met in college, and let me tell you, she was the definition of radiant. She had this spark in her eyes, a mix of ambition and mischief that pulled me in from the start. We were married by 26, ready to take on the world together. Our life seemed like something straight out of a Hallmark movie. We had a beautiful house in the suburbs with a garden Angela adored. She'd spend her weekends planting flowers, while the kids played on the swings. I'd usually be inside, tinkering with code, or catching up on a project deadline. But that was the dynamic we'd built. Angela was the social butterfly who lit up every room, and I was the dependable rock behind the scenes. It worked, until it didn't. The cracks started to show slowly, as they often do. At first, it was small things. Angela's mood swings, her growing frustration with me working late, or her seeming disinterest in the little things we used to enjoy together. I chalked it up to the stresses of raising 2 kids and running a household. But hindsight is 20/20. And looking back, I can see those moments for what they were. Warning signs. Our relationship wasn't without its share of challenges. Angela had always been the dreamer in our duo, the one with big plans and an even bigger heart. But she also had a streak of restlessness. After Emily was born, she decided to quit her job as a marketing executive to focus on the kids. While I supported her decision, I knew it was a tough transition for her. Angela wasn't someone who liked sitting still, and over time, I could see that spark of ambition dimming. I tried to fill the gaps, planning date nights, complimenting her on the little things, and making sure she knew how much I appreciated her. But my job demanded long hours, and no matter how much I tried to balance it all, something always slipped through the cracks. Then came Michael. Michael Andrews was a friend of Angela's from her pre-marriage days. They'd worked together briefly and kept in touch over the years, through social media. I'd heard his name mentioned a few times, mostly in passing, and never thought much of it. He was married, had a kid, and seemed like one of those harmless acquaintances everyone keeps around. At least, that's what I told myself. Angela started mentioning him more frequently, though she'd laugh about some old joke they'd shared or talk about how he was going through a tough time with his wife. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I trusted Angela implicitly. We'd built a life together, shared dreams, and created a family. Why would I question that? But the signs became harder to ignore. Angela started spending more time on her phone, her laughter becoming less about moments we shared and more about whatever was on her screen. She'd smile at her texts, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. When I'd ask her about it, she'd brush it off with a simple, "Oh, it's just Michael being Michael." It felt harmless, yet something deep inside me started to churn. One evening, while Angela was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't proud of it, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen, and there it was, a message from Michael that simply read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." My stomach dropped. When Angela came back into the room, I confronted her. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, that this was some misunderstanding. But instead of calming my fears, Angela froze. She didn't deny it, didn't brush it off like I'd hoped. Instead, she sighed deeply and said, "Daniel, we need to talk." Those 4 words felt like a punch to the gut. Angela admitted that she and Michael had been talking a lot more recently. At first, it was innocent, just 2 old friends reconnecting. But things had escalated. They'd met up a few times under the guise of catching up, and one thing had led to another. She insisted it wasn't physical, just emotional. But the weight of her words hit me all the same. My wife, the woman I'd loved and built a life with, had emotionally checked out of our marriage. I was stunned, angry, and heartbroken all at once. Angela apologized profusely, blaming herself and her feelings of loneliness. She said she felt like I didn't see her anymore, that she was just a shadow in the life we'd built. As much as I wanted to scream, to throw her words back in her face, part of me understood I'd let my work consume me, neglecting the woman who'd been my partner for over a decade. We agreed to try counseling. I wanted to believe we could fix this, that we could find our way back to the people we used to be. Angela seemed committed too, cutting off all contact with Michael and focusing on rebuilding our trust. For a while, it felt like we were making progress. But as the months passed, that initial determination started to fade. Angela grew distant again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her heart wasn't fully in it. It wasn't until a friend of mine, someone who worked in the same building as Angela, spotted her having lunch with Michael that everything unraveled again. Angela's lunch with Michael felt like a dagger twisting in the wound that was just beginning to heal. My friend Jason didn't mince words when he called me. He said, "Dan, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I saw Angela with some guy today at that little cafe on 5th. They looked close." It wasn't just a passing mention. Jason described how they sat in a tucked-away booth, leaning toward each other in a way that screamed intimacy. Michael had even reached across the table to touch her hand. That mental image burned itself into my mind. When Angela came home that evening, I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I watched her. She moved through the house like everything was normal, but there was a nervous energy about her. She avoided my gaze, busied herself with chores she usually left undone, and excused herself to bed earlier than usual. It was painfully obvious. Something was wrong. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Over breakfast, I asked her directly, "Were you with Michael yesterday?" The color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she set her coffee cup down. For a moment, it seemed like she might lie, but then she just nodded. "We just had lunch, Daniel. That's it. I needed closure, and I thought it was better to meet him and end things properly." She tried to make it sound reasonable, but I wasn't buying it. The hurt, the betrayal, it all came rushing back. "I thought we were done with him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We agreed, Angela. No more Michael, no more lies." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry I should have told you, but I didn't want to hurt you again. It wasn't romantic. I swear it wasn't. I just needed to be sure I could move on." "Move on from him or from us?" I asked, my voice cracking. She didn't answer, and in that silence, I realized I'd been holding on to the idea of us more than the reality of us. The days that followed were tense. Angela and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was forced and superficial. The trust between us, what little was left, had been shattered again. I started questioning everything. Was she still talking to him? Was there more to their closure than she admitted? My mind spiraled with doubts. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat Angela down. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "I feel like I'm the only one trying to save this marriage." Angela looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "That's not true, Daniel. I love you. I want this to work." "Then why do you keep going back to him?" I asked. "Why does it feel like I'm always competing for your attention?" Her response cut me deeper than I thought possible. "Because with Michael, I feel seen. He listens to me in a way you haven't in years. I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel." That was it. The admission I'd been dreading Angela wasn't just distracted. She was emotionally invested in someone else. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "Angela, I can't compete with a fantasy. If you can't choose us, then maybe there's nothing left to save." The next few weeks were a blur. Angela and I agreed to a trial separation. I moved into a small apartment downtown, close enough to see the kids regularly, but far enough to give us both space. I threw myself into work, hoping it would numb the pain. But every time I saw Emily and Jacob, the reality of our fractured family hit me like a freight train. Angela and I tried to keep things civil for the kids' sake, but our interactions were strained. She seemed lost, unsure of what she wanted. I clung to the hope that time apart would help her see what we had, that she'd realize Michael was just a distraction from the life we'd built together. But then came the bombshell. A mutual friend of ours, Karen, called me out of the blue. "Dan, I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I saw Angela and Michael at a hotel last weekend." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. A hotel. There was no just lunch this time. I confronted Angela that evening, my heart pounding as I dialed her number. She didn't deny it. Instead, she broke down crying. "I don't know who I am anymore, Daniel. I feel so broken. And Michael, he was there when I needed someone." Her words stung, but they also made something inside me snap. "Angela, I've been here for you, I've always been here. But you chose him over and over. You chose him." That was the moment I realized our marriage wasn't just cracked. It was irreparably broken. I filed for divorce the following week. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Angela moved in with Michael, confirming what I'd feared all along. I focused on being the best father I could be, pouring all my energy into Emily and Jacob. But the nights were the worst. That's when the loneliness crept in, the doubts and regrets swirling in my mind. Karen, who'd been my rock through all of this, encouraged me to start therapy. It was there that I began to unpack everything: the betrayal, the guilt, the feeling of not being enough. It was a painful process, but slowly, I started to heal. Angela and I eventually found a way to co-parent amicably, though our interactions were limited to logistics and the occasional school event. Michael didn't last long in her life. Within a year, they'd broken up, and Angela admitted she'd made a mistake by then. It was too late. Looking back, I can see how we both contributed to the breakdown of our marriage. I wasn't as present as I should have been, and Angela sought solace in someone who made her feel valued. But the choices we made after that, the lies, the betrayals, are what ultimately tore us apart. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's the importance of communication. Relationships require effort, vulnerability, and honesty. Without those, even the strongest foundations can crumble. And to anyone watching this, who might be struggling in their own relationships, remember this: love is about showing up, even when it's hard. Talk to your partner, listen to them, and don't let the little things fester into something that can't be undone. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories too. Together, we can learn from each other's experiences and grow stronger. The divorce was supposed to mark the end of the chapter, the conclusion to a painful and tumultuous period in my life. For a while, it did. Angela and I maintained a cautious distance, co-parenting effectively, but avoiding any personal conversations. Michael was out of her life not long after the papers were finalized, but that was no consolation. The damage had already been done, and I had to focus on rebuilding myself and my relationship with the kids. But life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. It was a warm summer afternoon. Nearly a year after the divorce, I was sitting at the park, watching Emily and Jacob play, when Angela unexpectedly approached me. She looked different, not just physically, but emotionally. Her confident demeanor had softened, and there was an air of vulnerability about her that I hadn't seen in years. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "can we talk just for a minute?" I nodded, unsure of where this was going. We found a bench under a tree, away from the noise of the playground. Angela took a deep breath before speaking. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," she said, her voice trembling. "But I wanted to apologize for everything, for Michael, for the lies, for how I hurt you and the kids." Her words caught me off guard. I had spent so long being angry at her, replaying every argument and betrayal in my mind, that I hadn't considered the possibility of her admitting fault. "I made so many mistakes," she continued. "I thought I was chasing something I needed, but all I did was destroy the life we built together. And now I realize, I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for that." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Her apology felt genuine, and a part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay. But another part of me, the part still nursing the wounds she'd left, couldn't let go so easily. "Angela, I appreciate you saying that," I finally replied. "But it's not just about forgiveness, it's about trust. And that's not something we can rebuild with words alone." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I don't expect anything from you, Daniel. I just needed you to know how sorry I am." Our conversation didn't change anything, but it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time, I felt like I could move forward without the weight of resentment holding me back. Over the next few months, life began to stabilize. The kids were adjusting to the new routine, and I was finding my footing as a single father. But just as I started to feel like I had a handle on things, another unexpected twist turned my world upside down. It started with a phone call from Karen. "Dan, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "I ran into Angela yesterday. She looked rough. She mentioned she's been having some health issues, but she didn't go into detail. I think you should check on her." I hesitated. Angela and I weren't exactly on speaking terms beyond co-parenting logistics, and I wasn't sure if it was my place to step in. But Karen's concern lingered in my mind, and later that evening, I decided to call Angela. She answered on the third ring, her voice weak and unsteady. "Daniel?" "Hey," I said. "Karen mentioned you weren't feeling well. Is everything okay?" There was a long pause before she replied. "I didn't want to worry anyone, but I've been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Angela, the woman I had spent over a decade of my life with, the mother of my children, was facing something so terrifying and uncertain. Whatever anger or bitterness I still harbored toward her dissolved in that moment. "Angela, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "What can I do? How can I help?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm scared, Daniel. I've never been so scared in my life." From that moment on, everything shifted. Angela's diagnosis brought us back into each other's lives in a way neither of us had expected. I became her support system, accompanying her to doctor's appointments, helping with the kids when she was too exhausted. and being there for her in a way I hadn't been in years. As the weeks turned into months, Angela and I found ourselves reconnecting on a deeper level. We talked about everything, our past, our mistakes, and the ways we had hurt each other. For the first time, we were truly honest with each other, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Angela and I sat in the living room, sipping tea and reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. "Do you ever wish we could go back?" she asked softly. I looked at her, seeing the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think what matters more is where we go from here." Angela smiled, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'd like to find out." The climax of our story wasn't a dramatic declaration of love or a sudden reconciliation. It was the slow, steady rebuilding of trust and understanding. Angela's health improved with treatment, and as she regained her strength, so did our bond. We weren't the same people we had been when we first got married, and our relationship would never be the same. But in a way, that was okay. We had been through the fire and come out on the other side, stronger and more resilient. Through it all, I learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. It's about forgiveness, not just for others, but for yourself. And it's about finding hope, even in the darkest of times. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences and insights. Together, we can navigate the complexities of life and love. Angela's health scare became a crucible for change, but the tension between us didn't just evaporate overnight. As much as I tried to be there for her, old wounds had a way of surfacing when we least expected it. One evening, while I was helping Angela organize her paperwork for the next round of treatments, I stumbled upon a folder filled with handwritten letters. They weren't addressed to me. They were letters Angela had written to herself during her time with Michael. As I read through the pages, I found confessions, reflections, and even anger aimed at me for the ways she felt neglected. It was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into her mind during the darkest moments of our marriage. I could feel my chest tightening as I read one line. "I don't know if Daniel loves me anymore, or if he just loves the idea of what we used to have." That sentence struck a nerve. I had always thought of myself as a dedicated husband and father. But Angela's words forced me to confront some hard truths about the person I had become. Had I truly been there for her when she needed me most? Or had I just been going through the motions, assuming our love would always sustain itself? I couldn't keep it to myself. That night, after the kids were in bed, I handed Angela the letters and asked, "Why didn't you show me these?" She froze, her face pale as she realized what I had found. "Daniel, those were never meant for anyone else to read." "I understand that," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "But these words, Angela, they're important. They explain so much about what went wrong between us. I just wish I'd known how you felt back then." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked down at the letters. "I didn't know how to tell you were always so focused on work, on providing for us, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful, but I felt invisible, Daniel. Like I was just another part of the house, not a person you cared about anymore." Her words stung, but they also opened a door I hadn't realized was locked. For the first time in years, we talked, really talked, about the things we had buried. We didn't hold back, and it was messy, emotional, and painful, but it was also cathartic. That night, we made an unspoken agreement to stop running from the past and face it head-on. The pivotal moment came a few weeks later, when Angela invited me to one of her therapy sessions. She had been seeing a counselor since her diagnosis, and she thought it might help if I joined her for a session. I was hesitant at first, unsure of what would come up, but I agreed. Sitting in that quiet, sterile room with Angela and the therapist, I felt more vulnerable than I ever had before Angela started by sharing her fears. Not just about her health, but about us. "I don't want to keep hurting Daniel," she said, her voice trembling. "But I also don't know if he'll ever really forgive me." The therapist turned to me. "Daniel, what do you feel when you hear Angela say that?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I feel conflicted. I want to forgive her. I really do. But there's a part of me that's still angry, still hurt by everything that happened." Angela reached for my hand, her grip shaky. "I don't blame you. I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I want to try. I want to rebuild what we had, even if it's different now." That session became a turning point for us. It wasn't a magical fix, but it gave us a roadmap for navigating the difficult terrain ahead. We committed to being honest with each other, even when it was uncomfortable. We started setting boundaries and carving out time to focus on our relationship. Slowly but surely, the walls between us began to come down. Just when it seemed like we were making progress, life threw us another curveball. Angela's cancer treatments took a toll on her physically and emotionally. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed, her body too weak to function. I juggled work, the kids, and caring for her, pushing myself to the limit. But one evening, as I was helping Emily with her homework while simultaneously trying to cook dinner, I felt myself snap. "Dad, you're burning the pasta," Jacob pointed out as smoke started rising from the pot. I slammed the spoon onto the counter, frustration bubbling over. "Can I get 5 minutes of peace, please?" The kids fell silent, their wide eyes staring at me. I immediately regretted my outburst. "I'm sorry," I said, kneeling down to their level. "Dad's just tired. It's not your fault." Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Angela called me into the bedroom. She looked pale and frail, but her eyes were filled with concern. "Daniel, you can't keep doing this alone." "I'm fine," I insisted, though the exhaustion was evident in my voice. "No, you're not," she said firmly. "You've been carrying everything, me, the kids, the house, and it's too much. We need help." Her words made me realize that I had been so focused on being strong for everyone else that I hadn't allowed myself to feel anything. I hadn't asked for help, because I thought it would make me seem weak. But Angela was right. We couldn't do this alone. Accepting help was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most transformative. Karen and Jason stepped in, helping with the kids and running errands. Angela's parents, who had been distant for years, came to stay with us for a while, offering support in ways I hadn't expected. With the extra help, I was able to focus more on Angela and our relationship. We spent hours talking, laughing, and even crying together. There were moments of joy, like when we celebrated her last round of chemo with a small family party, and moments of heartbreak, like when she broke down in my arms, fearing the cancer would return. Through it all, I began to see Angela, not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. She was flawed, just like me, but she was also resilient, compassionate, and fiercely determined. The climax of our story wasn't a single event, but a culmination of everything we had been through. It was the moment we realized that love isn't about avoiding pain, but about choosing to stay, even when it hurts. On a crisp autumn evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Angela turned to me and said, "Thank you, Daniel, for not giving up on me, even when I gave you every reason to." I took her hand in mine and replied, "Thank you for fighting for us, for the kids, for yourself." We still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in years I felt like we were truly walking it together. If this story has touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories too. Remember, love and forgiveness are journeys, not destinations. The fall evening when Angela and I shared our heartfelt gratitude wasn't the end of our challenges. It was a brief moment of calm before the storm life, as we had learned by now, wasn't content to let us settle into a predictable rhythm. The road to our personal climax was fraught with trials we couldn't have foreseen. One of the most pivotal moments came just a month after Angela completed her final round of chemo. We were cautiously optimistic, both of us hoping to leave the fear of cancer behind. Angela seemed eager to get back into the groove of life, even considering a return to work. But the universe had other plans. It started subtly. Angela mentioned feeling more tired than usual, her energy waning even during the simplest activities. At first, we chalked it up to post-treatment recovery. But when she fainted one morning while getting Emily ready for school, we knew something wasn't right. The emergency room visit confirmed our worst fears. The cancer had returned, and this time it was more aggressive. The doctor's words felt like a punch to the gut, leaving us both reeling. Angela's face turned pale as she tried to process the news. I held her hand tightly, struggling to keep my own emotions in check for her sake. "Daniel," she said quietly that evening as we sat in her hospital room, "I don't know if I have the strength to go through this again." Her words broke me. I could see the fear and exhaustion etched into her face, and for the first time, I felt truly powerless. "You don't have to do this alone," I said, my voice trembling. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together, every step of the way." Angela nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, but the fight had visibly drained from her. This was no longer just about her physical health. It was a battle to hold on to hope. As Angela began her second round of treatments, the tension in our lives reached its peak. The kids, though young, were beginning to pick up on the severity of the situation. Emily, always the more sensitive of the two, started asking questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" she asked one night, her big brown eyes searching mine for reassurance. I knelt down to her level, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Mommy's very sick right now, sweetheart, but she's strong, and she's fighting as hard as she can." It was the truth, but it didn't feel like enough. I could see the worry in Emily's eyes, a reflection of my own fears. Meanwhile, Jacob, who had always been more reserved, started acting out at school. His teacher called me one afternoon to report that he'd gotten into a fight with another boy who had made a comment about sick mums. It broke my heart to see how deeply our situation was affecting him. Angela and I made the difficult decision to sit down with the kids and explain what was happening in a way they could understand. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. Seeing their tear-streaked faces as we talked about the possibility of Mommy not getting better was almost unbearable. But it was also a reminder of why we had to keep fighting. For them. For us. For the life we had built together. The turning point came during one of Angela's treatments. She was hooked up to an IV, her frail body resting against the hospital bed. I sat beside her, reading aloud from one of her favorite books. It was a small ritual we had started during her first bout with cancer, and it brought us both a sense of comfort. Midway through a chapter, Angela reached out and took my hand. "Daniel, I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything," I replied, my throat tightening. "If I don't make it," she began, her words faltering as tears welled up in her eyes. "If I don't make it, I need you to be happy. I need you to find joy again, for the kids, and for yourself." The weight of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I wanted to argue, to tell her she would pull through, but the look in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't giving up. She was preparing for the possibility of an outcome neither of us wanted to face. "I promise," I said, my voice breaking. "But you have to promise me something, too." "What's that?" she asked, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Promise me you'll keep fighting. Promise me you won't give up." Angela squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with determination. I promise. The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical appointments, emotional highs and lows, and moments of quiet reflection. Angela's strength amazed me. Despite the toll the treatments took on her body, she found ways to show up for the kids, even if it was just reading them bedtime stories from her hospital bed. But the most intense moment came one stormy evening when Angela's condition took a sudden turn. For the worse, she was rushed to the hospital with severe complications, and for hours we were left in limbo, waiting for news from the doctors. Sitting in that sterile waiting room, I felt more helpless than I ever had before Jason and Karen arrived to offer their support. But their presence was a blur. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Angela, the possibility of losing her, and the weight of raising our kids alone. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was serious, but not hopeless. Angela had stabilized, but she was far from out of the woods. The relief was short-lived, replaced by the sobering realization that this was a battle we might not win. That night, as I sat by Angela's bedside, watching her sleep, I made a decision I would stop focusing on what we might lose and start cherishing what we still had. Every moment, every smile, every laugh, it all mattered. I realized that while I couldn't control the outcome, I could control how I chose to spend the time we had left. Angela woke up the next morning, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You stayed all night," she said, her voice weak but steady. "Of course I did," I replied. "I'm not going anywhere." Her lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The fight was far from over, but that moment marked a shift in our story. Angela and I stopped dwelling on the what-ifs and started living in the present. We found joy in the small things: family game nights, lazy afternoons watching movies, and even cooking together when Angela felt up to it. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything threatened to crush us. But we leaned on each other, on our friends, and on the unwavering love we had for our kids. Through it all, Angela's promise to keep fighting inspired me in ways I never expected. She taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about finding the courage to get back up, no matter how many times life knocks you down. If you've been following this journey, thank you for being here. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Stories like these remind us of the power of love, resilience, and the human spirit. Together, we can find hope, even in the darkest of times. The pivotal storm that brought Angela back from the brink wasn't the end of our journey, but it did serve as a wake-up call for both of us. Life didn't hand out guarantees, and we were living proof of that. The days that followed were filled with equal parts dread and hope, a delicate balancing act that neither of us could have imagined just a year earlier. As Angela's health wavered, our family faced a major turning point. Emily and Jacob, though young, began to sense the gravity of the situation. Emily started asking questions, some innocent, and others heartbreakingly direct. One evening, she climbed into my lap, holding a drawing she'd made. It was a picture of our family, but instead of our usual smiles, everyone had tears streaming down their faces. "Why is everyone sad, Daddy?" she asked, her big eyes filled with curiosity and fear. I swallowed the lump in my throat, knowing that honesty was the only way forward. "Sometimes, sweetie, families go through really hard things, but even when we're sad, we still love each other, and we always stick together." Jacob, ever observant, joined the conversation. "Is Mommy going to die?" His bluntness took me by surprise, but I nodded slowly, choosing my words carefully. "Mommy is very sick, but she's doing everything she can to get better. And no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. We're a team, remember." Their little heads bobbed in agreement, and we shared a family hug. It wasn't much, but it was a reminder that love was our anchor, keeping us grounded in the storm. Angela's treatments continued, and though her spirit remained strong, her body struggled to keep up. Her doctor suggested an experimental trial, a last-ditch effort to combat the aggressive nature of her cancer. The decision was fraught with tension. The trial offered a glimmer of hope, but came with significant risks. Angela and I spent hours debating the pros and cons, our conversations tinged with both desperation and determination. One night, as we sat on the couch, she placed her hand over mine and said, "I don't want to leave you and the kids without fighting with everything I have." Her words broke my heart, but they also solidified my resolve. "Then we'll do it," I said. "Whatever it takes, we'll face it together." The trial began, and the side effects were brutal. Angela's strength waned, and there were days when even getting out of bed seemed impossible. Watching her struggle was like a knife twisting in my chest, but she never gave up. Her courage inspired everyone around her, from the nurses to the other patients in the trial. But it wasn't just Angela who was growing stronger. It was all of us. The kids became little warriors in their own right, finding ways to cheer Angela up when she needed it most. Emily started writing her Mommy's Feel Better book, a collection of drawings and notes that Angela kept by her bedside. Jacob, ever practical, took it upon himself to help me with household chores, proudly declaring himself man of the house. These small acts of love and resilience became our lifeline, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. The climax of our story came during a particularly harrowing night. Angela had been experiencing severe pain, and we rushed her to the hospital in the dead of winter. The roads were slick with ice, and every mile felt like an eternity. I kept glancing at Angela in the passenger seat, her face pale and contorted with pain, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. When we arrived, the ER was chaos. Flu season had filled every available seat, and the waiting room buzzed with tension. But Angela was taken back quickly, the urgency of her condition clear. I paced the hallway, my heart pounding as I waited for any news. Finally, a doctor approached, his expression serious but calm. "She's stable for now, but we'll need to monitor her closely. The pain was caused by complications from the treatment, but we've managed to get it under control." The relief was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. Angela's condition was a stark reminder of how precarious her situation had become. That night, as I sat by her hospital bed, I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "I'm so scared, Angela," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'll do if I lose you." She reached out, her hand weak but steady as it found mine. "You'll keep going, Daniel. For the kids, for yourself, you're stronger than you think." Her words, simple yet profound, became my mantra in the days that followed. I clung to them like a lifeline, finding strength in her unwavering belief in me. As Angela recovered from that night, we reached another turning point. The experimental treatment began to show signs of success. Her doctors, cautiously optimistic, noted that her latest scans showed a reduction in the tumor's size. It wasn't a cure, but it was hope. A fragile, precious thing we had almost forgotten how to hold. The news was a shot of adrenaline for all of us. Angela's energy returned in small bursts, enough for her to sit at the dinner table with the kids or take short walks around the block. These moments, though fleeting, felt monumental, like tiny victories in a war we were determined to win. The peak of our story wasn't a grand, dramatic moment, but a quiet realization that we had found our way back to each other. Angela and I, through all the pain and heartbreak, had rediscovered what it meant to truly love and support one another. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Angela turned to me with a soft smile. "Do you remember the promise you made me to find joy again, no matter what happens?" I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "Of course." "Well," she said, her eyes glistening with tears, "I think we've already found it, right here, right now. In that moment, I realized she was right. Joy wasn't a destination. It was something we created, even in the midst of chaos. It was the laughter of our children, the warmth of a shared embrace, and the unspoken understanding that we were stronger together. This journey wasn't the one we had planned, but it was the one that brought us closer than ever before. Angela's fight wasn't over, but neither was our hope. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Thank you for being part of our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this journey resonated with you. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The storm that had defined our lives for so long finally began to subside. The experimental treatment Angela had endured showed slow but steady progress, and her health stabilized. While we knew we weren't out of the woods entirely, we had reached a point of cautious hope. The weight of constant fear lifted, replaced by a renewed appreciation for every moment we shared as a family. The conflicts that had once felt insurmountable, Angela's betrayal, the wounds it left on our marriage, and the uncertainty of her health, had not vanished instead. They transformed into threads woven into the fabric of our story. What once threatened to tear us apart now held us together, stronger and more resilient than before. Angela and I had come a long way from the people we were at the start of this journey. She had faced her mistakes head-on, owning up to the pain she caused, and working tirelessly to rebuild the trust she had broken. Her cancer battle had stripped away any illusions of perfection, revealing a raw, vulnerable, but fiercely determined woman. She was no longer defined by her mistakes but by her courage to confront them and grow from them. For my part, I had learned to let go of the anger and bitterness that once consumed me. Forgiving Angela wasn't an act of forgetting. It was a choice to move forward together. I also learned to lean on others, to let my guard down, and to embrace the messy, imperfect reality of life. Most importantly, I rediscovered the value of being present, not just physically but emotionally, for the people I loved. One of the most touching moments came a few months after Angela's health stabilized. Emily and Jacob surprised us with a family celebration day, complete with handmade decorations and a dinner they had, mostly, cooked themselves. Emily presented Angela with her Feel Better book, now brimming with new pages filled with drawings of her hopes for the future. Jacob proudly declared that he had learned to make scrambled eggs, just in case Dad burns something again. As we sat around the dining table, the warmth of laughter and love filled the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no shadow looming over us, just the simple joy of being together. That evening, Angela pulled me aside, her eyes shimmering with gratitude. "I don't know how I got so lucky," she said softly. "After everything I put you through, you still stood by me." I wrapped my arms around her, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "It wasn't luck, Angela. It was love. And no matter what happens, we'll always have that." The final moments of our story weren't grand or dramatic. They were quiet, everyday moments that reminded us of how far we'd come. Angela and I started volunteering at a local cancer support group, sharing our story with others navigating similar struggles. It became a source of healing for both of us, a way to turn our pain into something meaningful. Emily and Jacob thrived, their resilience a testament to the strength of our family. Emily began taking art classes, inspired by the drawings she had created during Angela's treatments. Jacob, ever curious, developed a knack for fixing things around the house, earning him the nickname Little Engineer. As for me, I found a balance I hadn't thought possible. Work was still important, but it no longer defined me. I made time for the things that truly mattered: family game nights, lazy Sunday mornings, and long walks with Angela. Each moment felt like a gift, one I didn't take for granted. Angela's journey taught us all that life doesn't always follow the script we envision. It's messy, unpredictable, and often unfair, but it's also beautiful, filled with moments of connection, growth, and love that make every challenge worth facing. As we stood together one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Angela squeezed my hand and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know we can face it together." I smiled, pulling her close. Together. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Stories like this remind us of the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience in the face of life's greatest challenges. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more heartfelt stories and reflections. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories inspire and connect us all. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.